It's amazing how fast humans can descend into chaos the moment absolutely nothing is wrong. Somehow we've mastered panicking at threats that don't even exist. And trust me, it only gets dumber. 1. A woman once triggered full meltdown mode in a grocery store because she believed the automatic doors were following her, a conclusion she reached after walking past them 3 times and discovering, to her horror, that the motion sensor had the audacity to function exactly as designed. She demanded management review security footage to identify whoever keeps opening the doors remotely, and when told this was simply physics and a little red laser doing its day job, she insisted the store had installed AI surveillance portals meant to track her movements, because apparently the most advanced technology in the building wasn't the freezer compressors, but a doorway that had achieved sentience exclusively to ruin her Tuesday, leaving staff to reassure her that if the door ever decided to target someone, it wouldn't start with a woman holding coupon flyers and 2 bruised avocados. 2. One man at an airport caused a full-scale panic, not for safety reasons, but because he became convinced his bag had been shrunk while passing through the security scanner, which is impressive considering the bag was visibly the same size, and he simply forgot he'd tightened the straps earlier. Still, he marched to the nearest TSA agent demanding an explanation for the luggage compression incident, insisting the machine had molecularly compromised his belongings and might now be emitting radiation strong enough to alter his DNA, as if TSA carries a side hustle and accidental superhero creation. Staff tried explaining that the scanners do not, in fact, operate like a budget version of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, but the man refused to accept any science that didn't involve comic book tropes, forcing multiple employees to calmly reassure a grown adult that his backpack was neither cursed, irradiated, nor dimensionally unstable. 3. A cafe barista once reported a customer who sprinted to the counter in full-blown alarm because her latte was smoking, a term she used to describe the steam gently rising from a hot beverage, a phenomenon that apparently required an emergency intervention. The customer insisted the drink was on fire internally and demanded a fire extinguisher, a manager, and possibly a priest depending on availability, while the staff attempted to explain the groundbreaking concept of heat meeting air. She then claimed the steam was indicating imminent combustion, which she had learned, according to her, from a survival documentary that was very obviously not about coffee. To de-escalate, the staff poured the drink into a cold cup, watched the steam vanish, and the woman declared the threat neutralized, as if she had just disarmed a latte-based explosive device, leaving everyone else to wonder how she navigates life in a world where soup presumably qualifies as a 4-alarm fire. 4. One employee triggered office-wide chaos after noticing a blinking red light on the copier and assuming with absolute certainty that the machine was sending Morse code distress signals, because nothing screams danger like a paper jam indicator doing its single blinking task. He evacuated the room, warned the team of a possible electrical fire, and drafted an email recommending that management quarantine the device before it spread whatever malfunction it had, as though copier errors are contagious and spread like medieval plagues. When IT arrived and pressed the jam release door, an action that solved the problem in less than 8 seconds, the employee insisted the blinking pattern had changed after being discovered, suggesting the copier had entered a defensive mode, making it the first documented case of office equipment accused of complex emotional manipulation, all because someone couldn't handle a crumpled sheet of paper. 5. A man at a gym once initiated a panic because the treadmill started accelerating on its own, which would be alarming if he hadn't been gripping the speed adjustment button the entire time, mistaking it for a heart rate sensor. He loudly declared the machine rogue tech, refused to step off, and demanded staff shut off the building's power before the machines link up, confidently believing the treadmill was moments away from forming a coalition with the ellipticals. Once an employee pointed out the button under his thumb, the man refused to release it for fear of provoking the machine further, as if the treadmill would retaliate with a hostile takeover of the stretching mats. Eventually, the staff gently peeled his hand away, stopped the machine, and reassured him there was no uprising, though the free weights probably judged him anyway. 6. A hotel guest once called the front desk in a panic because she believed the shower was leaking gas, which would have been a legitimate disaster if the gas she referred to hadn't been steam from hot water. She claimed the room was filling with a mysterious fog that seeped from the metal grate, and she feared the hotel was about to explode. Staff attempted to clarify the difference between steam and fatal fumes, but she insisted steam could not exist outside of tea kettles and weather documentaries, leading her to barricade the bathroom door with towels like she was preventing a chemical weapons incident. Maintenance eventually opened the door, turned off the water, and demonstrated the scientific miracle of evaporation, which the guest regarded with suspicion, concluding the steam disappeared too fast to be natural, thereby accusing the hotel of deploying a gas leak that had the courtesy to vanish when questioned. 7. A shopper once caused a miniature riot in a supermarket aisle because she believed the mysterious beeping behind her was someone tracking her movements, only for an employee to reveal the culprit was the store's price scanner resetting itself. The shopper demanded to know why the store was monitoring civilian behavior, using a phrase normally reserved for dystopian thrillers rather than the cereal aisle. She insisted the beeping targeted her specifically, which is bold considering the machine beeps at precisely the same volume, frequency, and total lack of personality every hour. She tried to lead others in a boycott, calling the scanner digital surveillance, until a clerk pressed one button and the beeping stopped instantly, at which point she accused the staff of covering up a conspiracy because nothing says covert espionage like a plastic box that helps employees check the cost of frozen waffles. 8. A man at a park once panicked after seeing a squirrel freeze mid-motion and assumed it was suffering from a deadly airborne toxin, prompting him to shout warnings, wave his arms, and urge families to evacuate before the contaminant spread. Witnesses attempted to explain that squirrels frequently freeze to assess danger, a behavioral quirk, not a sign of chemical warfare. But he insisted the creature was clearly seizing and that everyone needed to protect the children, presumably from wildlife committing the terrible crime of being nervous. When the squirrel resumed running, the man triumphantly pointed and yelled, "It's spreading!" as if the rodent had reanimated from the dead rather than simply deciding it had stared at him long enough. By the time park staff intervened, the man had constructed a full narrative about government experiments, toxic blooms, and rodent-based plague signals, all inspired by one jittery squirrel doing normal squirrel things. 9. A woman started a mall-wide panic after hearing a low, rumbling noise that she interpreted as the building beginning to collapse, only for security to identify it as the sound of a cleaning machine rolling across tile, something it had done every night for years without triggering existential dread. She insisted the rumble was vibrational instability and demanded an evacuation protocol, even though the machine was visibly moving in plain sight, cleaning the floors with the enthusiasm of a tired custodian who had no interest in structural sabotage. She claimed the vibration was traveling through her bones, which, to be fair, describes most shopping experiences, but not the failure of a building's foundation. When security demonstrated the connection between the sound and the machine by turning it off, she suggested this was too convenient and may indicate the mall's walls were holding their breath, because nothing terrifies architecture more than being observed. 10. One office worker triggered unnecessary chaos after noticing her monitor flickering for half a second and concluding the building's power grid was moments away from catastrophic failure. She rushed through the office, warning everyone to unplug everything now before a surge took out their equipment, their projects, and potentially their identities, because apparently electricity is the leading cause of existential crisis. IT inspected the situation and discovered the monitor cable was loose, an issue she claimed was impossible because she hadn't touched it since last week. When the IT technician tightened the cable and the flicker disappeared, she accused the monitor of pretending to work, suggesting the computer had entered a deceptive psychological battle with her specifically. Co-workers returned to their tasks while she drafted a company-wide email urging management to implement anti-surge drills, ensuring her legacy as a pioneer of panic-based occupational policy. 11. A man at a restaurant erupted into alarm when he discovered a mysterious red liquid on his plate, which turned out to be tomato juice from the sliced tomatoes he had ordered. But he was adamant the liquid was evidence of contamination, possibly from blood, because he apparently believed tomatoes were capable of violent crime. Servers attempted to show him the cut edges of the tomato, which were visibly leaking their natural juices, but he refused to make eye contact with the vegetable, claiming it might spray again. He demanded medical attention and a full investigation into the restaurant's supply chain, suggesting the tomatoes may have been involved in something illegal, a theory no one was prepared to explore. Management replaced the dish with a new plate that still contained tomatoes, and when he saw the same harmless juice, he declared the entire restaurant compromised. which is a dramatic way of announcing he doesn't understand produce. 12. A commuter on a train once sparked panic by shouting that the car was tilting and moments away from derailing, a conclusion he reached after noticing the train lean slightly on a curve, something trains famously do as part of not launching passengers into nearby farmland. He grabbed a pole, braced himself like an action hero dangling from a helicopter, and urged everyone else to do the same. When the train straightened and the tilt disappeared, he declared it proof that his warning had stabilized the situation, effectively congratulating himself for defeating basic engineering. Even after the conductor calmly explained the mechanics of train travel, the man insisted the vehicle was testing boundaries, which is a fascinating accusation to level at public transportation. Passengers resumed scrolling through their phones as he remained ready to leap into battle with gravity itself. 13. An office intern ignited panic after mistaking the sound of a stapler being used behind him for a gunshot, diving under his desk with such speed that co-workers briefly considered awarding him an Olympic medal. He refused to emerge, shouting that the shooter might still be reloading, despite multiple co-workers calmly explaining that someone was binding reports, not engaging in an action movie showdown. When shown the stapler, he insisted it could still be weaponized, which technically is true of almost any object plus imagination. HR finally coaxed him out with the promise of a noise-canceling headset and a gentle reminder that office supplies have not yet declared war on humanity. Ironically, his dramatic dive created more workplace disruption than the actual stapler ever could, proving the greatest threat to peace was not weapons, but interns with vivid survival instincts. 14. A man in a parking lot once convinced himself a strange hissing noise near his car indicated a venomous snake waiting to ambush him, leading him to climb onto the hood and scream for help. Passers-by investigated and identified the snake as his own tire-losing heir, a common occurrence unless one believes tires possess malicious intent. He refused to approach the car until someone demonstrated using a key that the hissing stopped when pressure was applied to the valve, which he interpreted as the snake retreating. When shown the deflated tire, he announced he would never trust nature again, a dramatic stance considering the only wildlife present was a rubber circle experiencing a very mundane failure. The tow truck driver arrived to find the man perched on the hood like a lighthouse keeper, warning ships of imaginary serpents lurking below. 15. A fast food customer once started shouting that his drink was boiling, insisting the fizzing carbonation was a sign of chemical contamination. He treated the bubbles like they were a countdown to an explosion, holding the cup away from himself as though it had a self-destruct feature. Employees explained that soda fizzes because it contains carbon dioxide, a fact he rejected on the grounds that drinks shouldn't breathe, which is interesting logic since neither does he when thinking. When they poured a fresh soda to show identical bubbling, he concluded the machine was possessed, possibly by industrial spirits, which no one had the energy to unpack. The staff offered him water, which he sniffed suspiciously before declaring it temperature suspicious, proving he was capable of panicking at both liquids and the concept of hydration. 16. A woman sparked alarm at a library after hearing a faint buzzing sound coming from her desk and assuming a swarm of bees was about to erupt from the ventilation system. She leapt to her feet and warned others to evacuate before the hive breached, which is quite a phrase to apply to a quiet public building. Staff investigated and discovered the source was her own phone, vibrating repeatedly in her bag from receiving text notifications, a fact she greeted with deep skepticism. She insisted the phone never did that before, which may have been true if she habitually ignored incoming messages. When shown the notifications lighting up her screen, she concluded the bees must have hacked the device, thereby merging entomology, panic, and technological ignorance into one impressive display of fear-based creativity. 17. A man once triggered a poolside commotion by yelling that the water was moving on its own, apparently unaware that wind exists and that pools do not remain perfectly still unless indoors, covered or frozen solid. He insisted the ripples indicated an underwater creature stalking the deep end, despite the pool being both shallow and crystal clear, Children continued splashing happily as he demanded the lifeguard seal the perimeter, a phrase that felt unnecessarily dramatic for a setting involving sunscreen and inflatable flamingos. When the lifeguard demonstrated that waving a hand through the air produced the same wind-driven effect, the man accused him of colluding with the entity, suggesting the pool's greatest threat was not drowning but sentient water with a grudge. Eventually, he relocated to a lounge chair, where he monitored the pool like it was a volcanic crater preparing to erupt rather than a community amenity disturbed by a gentle breeze. 18. A man at a museum triggered a chain reaction of panic because he became convinced one of the sculptures was breathing, a conclusion he reached after noticing the shadows on the marble shift as the sun moved, which he interpreted as the statue subtly inhaling like it was preparing to join the living. He alerted security with the urgency of someone reporting a zombie uprising, insisting the sculpture tracked him with its chest movements, even though the sculpture did not, and could not, possess anything resembling a chest cavity. The guards tried to explain the concept of light changing shape during the day, but he dismissed that explanation as convenient science talk, the kind used by people who don't want to admit we're in danger, which is quite a bold accusation to level at employees making barely above minimum wage. When staff demonstrated the same shifting shadow using a flashlight, he accused them of collaborating with the statue because nothing screams covert conspiracy like a centuries-old marble bust and a bored security guard who really just wants his lunch break. 19. A woman at a pharmacy nearly caused a stampede after she felt a sudden tingling on her arm while standing in line and assumed she'd been exposed to a dangerous chemical, loudly announcing she was experiencing neurological shutdown, a diagnosis she made based on absolutely nothing except the power of pure imagination. Customers backed away as she claimed her skin was fizzing, a symptom not currently recognized by medical science, and demanded they seal the building before the contamination spread. The pharmacist calmly inspected her arm and found a single strand of her own hair stuck to her sleeve, a discovery that should have ended the chaos, but instead prompted her to insist the hair was electrically charged and could not possibly be hers because she didn't style it that way today, as though rogue strands of hair follow a strict schedule. She left the store wearing latex gloves and a scarf over her face, which did nothing except prove that panic will always outrun logic in the cruel marathon known as everyday life. 20. One man at a movie theater sent the entire audience into confusion after he became convinced the rumbling from the subwoofers wasn't part of the film, but a sign the building was collapsing. He shouted for emergency lighting, pointed at the speakers like they were detonating charges, and told everyone to brace for impact during a children's animated movie about talking animals, which somewhat diminished the credibility of his warning. Staff paused the movie to calm him down, at which point he accused them of strategically silencing the tremors, and claimed the pause confirmed his theory because now the vibrations stopped exactly when I said something, which is, of course, how pausing a movie works. After multiple employees explained the existence of sound design, he demanded to see the building's architectural blueprints, because nothing soothes anxiety like reviewing load-bearing calculations while families wait to find out whether the panda gets the magic amulet. 21. A woman at a farmer's market created her own dramatic subplot after hearing a faint buzzing sound near her shopping bag and assuming she was seconds away from being swarmed by bees, even though the noise was coming from a phone inside a vendor's apron pocket. She dropped her produce, shouted a warning, and sprinted toward the parking lot with the determination of a person outrunning an apocalypse, leaving behind a perfectly calm scene where not a single insect had expressed even mild interest in her. Vendors tried to call out that the noise was just a notification alert, but she interpreted their attempts to help as code phrases for "the hive is upon us," which gave the entire situation a strange espionage energy. By the time she reached her car, she was composing herself like a survivor recounting a brush with death, completely unaware that the only creature that had tried to interact with her was a text message asking someone to pick up more lemons. 22. A man at an electronics store caused mounting confusion when he refused to enter the automatic sliding doors, convinced they were malfunctioning because they opened before he got close enough to trigger them, which was not an error, but simply the sensor doing its job with a generous radius. He insisted the doors were reading his intentions, which is a charming compliment for a set of infrared beams, and demanded an employee walk through first to absorb the risk. The employee complied. The doors opened normally, and instead of accepting this as proof that the doors were fine, The man declared that the store had trained the sensors to recognize employees, as if doors undergo onboarding sessions. Once he was eventually coaxed inside, he walked with the caution of someone navigating a minefield, periodically testing the air around him with his hands, which didn't accomplish anything except provide free entertainment to everyone waiting in line. 23. A woman sparked panic in a laundromat after hearing her washing machine growling, which turned out to be the sound of coins rattling inside the drum, a discovery that would have calmed most people but instead convinced her that a small animal was trapped inside, possibly a raccoon attempting escape through her delicate cycle. She demanded the staff stop all machines immediately, insisting the creature might be moving between washers like a subterranean fugitive. When they opened the machine and showed her the coins, she remained unconvinced, claiming the animal must have teleported to another unit, which is quite an accusation to aim at a hypothetical raccoon. The staff offered to run an empty cycle to demonstrate the sound, and when it repeated exactly, she declared the machine haunted, a diagnosis that required zero evidence and yet seemed to satisfy her better than the existence of spare change. 24. A man at a hardware store set off his own personal crisis after holding a flashlight with a low battery and noticing it flicker, which he interpreted not as "replace the batteries," but as "the building's wiring is failing and we are moments from an electrical inferno." He ran to the staff, insisting he felt electrical tension in the air, a phrase that means nothing outside of disaster movies, and tried to pull other customers away from the aisles like he was rescuing them from an invisible hazard. When an employee placed fresh batteries into the flashlight and the flickering vanished, the man narrowed his eyes suspiciously and accused the employee of covering up a systemic safety failure, because apparently the conspiracy extended all the way to the battery display. He left the store with the caution of someone expecting sparks to erupt from the pavement, proving once again that panic does not require evidence, just a flashlight with tired batteries. 25. A woman at a public fountain ignited unnecessary panic after noticing the water rippling toward her feet and declaring that the fountain was flooding, a brave interpretation of a structure that circulates water on purpose. She backed away like the bricks themselves were plotting against her and warned others that the pressure was increasing, as though fountains occasionally decide to revolt and wash away unsuspecting pedestrians. Staff calmly pointed out that there was a breeze, which she dismissed immediately because water doesn't react that dramatically. To wind, a statement contradicted by every lake, river, puddle, and beverage on Earth. When someone placed a hand over the water to block the airflow and demonstrated the ripples disappearing, she concluded this was suspiciously perfect timing, a sign that the fountain was behaving, which apparently was even more alarming. 26. A man triggered awkward chaos at a self-checkout station after hearing a robotic voice say, "unexpected item in bagging area," and assuming he'd been accused of theft by artificial intelligence, shouting that he hadn't stolen anything and that the machine was profiling his groceries. Staff attempted to explain that the scale simply detected weight before the item was scanned, and the machine was not, in fact, making a moral judgment about his character. He insisted the voice had an accusatory tone, which is impressive given that the system uses the vocal enthusiasm of a depressed traffic cone. Even after an employee resolved the issue, he continued lecturing the machine about false allegations, while people behind him debated whether he was unstable or simply very committed to arguing with technology. In any case, the machine remained unmoved, mostly because it lacked the programming required to care. 27. A woman caused widespread confusion at a pet store after becoming convinced a gecko was mimicking her breathing pattern, claiming the reptile was trying to establish dominance, which is a wild accusation to make about a creature whose primary ambition is not being eaten. She attempted to demonstrate the synchronized breathing by inhaling dramatically, which caused the gecko to freeze. A normal defensive behavior she interpreted as confirmation that the creature was preparing to challenge her authority. Staff explained that reptiles do not, in fact, participate in psychological warfare with customers, but she insisted the gecko had chosen her in some mystical adversarial bond. She left the store maintaining eye contact with the lizard, announcing to everyone that she refused to be intimidated by a creature with sticky toes, proving that sometimes the panic isn't about danger, it's about losing a staring contest with a reptile that wasn't playing. 28. A man disrupted a quiet library after noticing a draft near his reading table and concluding the building's ventilation system had entered failure mode, which he believed was evidenced by the pages of his book fluttering slightly, a phenomenon that did not suggest catastrophe so much as air exists. He asked the librarian if the building was experiencing air displacement instability, a term he invented on the spot, and recommended evacuating before the ducts ruptured, which would have been more convincing if he hadn't pointed toward a perfectly ordinary vent doing its entirely normal job. When the librarian demonstrated by adjusting a thermostat that the airflow responded exactly as designed, he accused her of masking the symptoms, like she was part of a HVAC crime syndicate. He eventually relocated to another table, repeatedly glancing over his shoulder as if the air might sneak up behind him. 29. A woman at a car wash panicked when she saw soap suds sliding down her windows and assumed her car's paint was melting, which suggests she believes automobiles are constructed from sugar sculptures. She honked repeatedly, shouting that the car wash was dissolving her vehicle in industrial foam, despite warnings printed clearly on every sign within a 20-foot radius. Attendants tried to explain that soap must be present in order to clean things, a concept she seemed willing to accept only if the soap remained invisible. When the rinse cycle began and the suds washed away, she accused the machine of hiding the damage, because apparently the car wash had not only destroyed her paint, but also covered its tracks, like a criminal fleeing the scene. After staff performed a walk-around inspection showing the paint was perfectly intact, she drove off muttering about cover-up operations, leaving everyone unsure whether she misunderstood car washes or simply feared soap on principle. 30. A man at a community gym nearly triggered a building-wide alert after noticing his reflection in a darkened window and mistaking it for a stranger staring at him from outside, which is understandable only if one has never encountered glass before. He attempted to scare off the intruder by raising his arms and yelling, only to have the reflection obediently copy him, which he interpreted as the stranger mocking his movements, rather than performing the extremely predictable act of mirroring. He demanded the staff escort him to the parking lot because the prowler might be waiting, completely ignoring the fact that no human on the planet has the ability to teleport from a window reflection into a parking lot in under 30 seconds. Staff finally turned on the overhead lights to show the reflection vanish, and although he left satisfied that the mysterious figure had retreated, he avoided that window for the rest of the year. 31. A woman at a restaurant caused unnecessary turmoil after noticing condensation forming on her cold drink and assuming the liquid was leaking through the glass, which would indeed be alarming if it were possible. She loudly informed the server that her cup was sweating profusely, a diagnosis that raised questions about her understanding of thermodynamics. When the server explained condensation in calm, simple terms, she insisted that glasses should not perspire in public, a standard no glass has ever agreed to follow. She demanded a napkin barrier, a new drink, and eventually a new table farther from the humidity zone, which was really just the same table but next to a decorative plant. She sipped her replacement drink while eyeing the moisture, suspiciously, like it was planning something criminal, ensuring everyone around her enjoyed their meals with the added entertainment of watching someone argue with water molecules. 32. A man at a public transit station triggered confusion by announcing that the escalator was accelerating, a bold claim about a machine moving at its usual glacial pace. He gripped the handrail with the desperation of someone about to be launched into orbit, insisting the steps were gaining momentum, even though commuters were stepping on and off without noticing anything except his dramatic narration. When staff informed him that the escalator had operated at the same speed for 15 years, he replied that machines evolve, suggesting he believed escalators undergo puberty. To reassure him, a worker stepped on, wrote it down, stepped off, and declared it normal, which he interpreted as a staged demonstration meant to hide the truth about mechanical surges, as though the transit authority is secretly battling rebellious escalators while maintaining a strict policy of silence. He eventually took the stairs, glaring at the machinery like it had personally betrayed him. 33. A woman at an office potluck created her own internal disaster after tasting a slightly spicy dip and deciding she was experiencing an allergic reaction, despite having no known allergies and the dip containing nothing beyond salsa, sour cream, and an aggressive amount of cumin. She dramatically announced that her throat was closing, though she continued speaking in complete paragraphs, which somewhat diminished the credibility of her claim. Co-workers offered water, but she refused it on the grounds that water spreads allergens, which is an innovative misunderstanding of biology. HR called the building nurse, who arrived, assessed her, and concluded she was experiencing mild regret and a moderate need for a beverage. The woman recovered fully after sipping a juice box, declaring she had cheated death, while everyone else reconsidered ever hosting a potluck again. 34. A man walking his dog in a suburban neighborhood sparked confusion after hearing a distant siren and believing it was targeting him specifically, claiming the pitch was too consistent, which is certainly a fresh reading of how emergency vehicles function. He urged his dog to run, which the dog did not do because even the dog recognized that sirens do not operate like heat-seeking missiles. He ducked behind a mailbox, peering around it as though SWAT had been dispatched to arrest him for improper recycling. When the ambulance finally drove past without even slowing down, he concluded that his evasive maneuvers had confused the signal, giving him a false sense of tactical brilliance. He completed the rest of his walk using the mailbox-hugging stealth of a man who believes paramedics are out to get him. 35. A woman at a boutique fitness studio caused a near riot after the instructor dimmed the lights for a cool-down stretch, which she interpreted as the onset of a blackout apocalypse, loudly insisting that everyone stay low and conserve oxygen, as if Pilates had suddenly become a post-disaster survival drill. She crawled toward the exit, shouting instructions no one asked for, warning classmates not to follow the emergency lights because they were clearly decoys. And when the instructor gently explained that dimming the lights was meant to be relaxing, she argued that darkness is never relaxing unless you're a bat, which didn't exactly boost her credibility. The lights returned to full brightness 30 seconds later, which she insisted was the result of her quick thinking, proving that sometimes the most dangerous thing in a fitness class isn't the kettlebells, but one person's determination to be the hero of a crisis that never existed. 36. A man at a suburban mailbox cluster created chaos after hearing a soft rustling inside the metal unit and concluding he had uncovered a wild animal nesting in the official correspondence of the American people, dramatically stepping back and shouting for residents to protect their extremities, a level of alarm usually reserved for bear sightings and poorly thought-out fireworks displays. When a postal worker arrived and opened the box, the panic fizzled instantly as the animal revealed itself to be a single grocery store coupon booklet slipping down the hinge. But the man refused to accept this anticlimax, claiming the booklet must have escaped its creature form and insisting the worker check the bushes for its true body, because apparently he believed mail can shapeshift when threatened. The postal worker offered him his own mail with the weary professionalism of someone who now needs hazard pay for interacting with envelopes. 37. A woman riding an elevator in an office building sparked widespread fear when she noticed the mirror on the back wall slightly warping her reflection and assumed the elevator was bending under pressure, not realizing the effect was caused by the mirror itself being installed with a minor curvature, which is hardly structural failure, but apparently convincing enough for her to declare the elevator had entered the collapse zone. She pounded the door-open button like she was launching a nuclear strike, shouted that everyone should brace for gravitational shift, and urged her fellow passengers to lean into the corners, which they understandably declined. When the elevator gently arrived at the next floor with all the drama of a loaf of bread rising, she accused the cables of faking stability, as though elevators dabble in emotional manipulation. The maintenance team later confirmed nothing was wrong except the human capacity to panic at literally anything reflective. 38. A man at a public aquarium nearly evacuated an entire exhibit after noticing the water inside a massive fish tank gently sloshing and assuming the glass was giving way, convinced the ocean was about to burst forth and claim its rightful territory in the gift shop. Staff tried explaining that the movement came from the filtration pumps, which create constant flow, but he insisted the pressure signature was changing, an impressive phrase for someone who also tried to dial 911 on a vending machine earlier that week. He pressed his palms to the glass like a volunteer martyr preparing for impact, warning nearby families about hydrodynamic instability and urging mothers to grab the children and flee to higher ground, which in this case would have been the cafeteria. The fish remained unbothered, swimming in circles with more dignity than the humans on the dry side of the tank. 39. A woman at a casual backyard barbecue launched herself into panic after hearing a faint crackle from the fire pit and assuming the flames were spreading underground, a concept she invented on the spot and defended passionately despite physics, logic, and common sense forming a unanimous opposition. She stomped around the yard searching for subterranean flare-ups, apparently convinced that fire behaves like a subway system, popping up at different stations to surprise commuters. When someone pointed out that crackling wood tends to make crackling noises, she argued that the fire sounded too opinionated, whatever that means. She demanded a shovel and began digging frantically, locating nothing except several worms who had certainly not signed up for this drama. Eventually, the host extinguished the pit just to calm her down, proving the fastest way to ruin a barbecue is to invite someone convinced the earth is a giant s'more waiting to ignite. 40. A man in a parking garage caused a traffic jam after spotting a small puddle beneath his car and assuming it was gasoline leaking from a ruptured tank, prompting him to yell at strangers to back away before it ignites, while brandishing his key fob as if it were a detonator. When a security guard approached and dipped a finger into the suspicious puddle, sniffed it, and announced it was just water dripping from the air conditioning system, the man remained adamant that the guard was downplaying the risk, perhaps in an effort to prevent mass hysteria over the terrifying concept of condensation. He insisted his car had never leaked before, which is adorable but irrelevant. After the guard offered to show him a Google search explaining how AC systems drain moisture, he waved the phone away like someone repelling a vampire with a cross, declaring that not everything on the internet is trustworthy, a statement delivered with perfect irony. 41. A woman at a big box store grabbed a customer service employee in panic because she heard a faint hum near the ceiling and assumed the building's lighting grid was about to explode, convinced the hum was a pre-detonation. Frequency, which sounds like a phrase she learned from either a conspiracy video or a microwave manual. The employee explained the hum came from fluorescent ballasts, devices that have hummed quietly since the dawn of office lighting. Yet she argued that lights shouldn't make noise unless they're planning something, which is quite an accusation to level at inanimate tubes filled with gas. She urged shoppers to take cover behind the seasonal decor aisle, a strategy that might protect you from bad taste, but not much else. When the lights continued functioning perfectly, she suggested the employee had diffused the situation without admitting it, granting him heroism he neither earned nor wanted. 42. A man on a hiking trail caused a full group panic after insisting the distant rumbling he heard was the mountain shifting, a phrase that would normally signal imminent geological disaster. Except the rumbling was coming from a nearby construction site operating a very normal bulldozer. His hiking companions tried to explain that mountains rarely telegraph their movements via subwoofer-level bass, but he refused to believe them because nature always warns you if you're willing to listen, a level of poetic sensitivity applied to the sound of diesel-powered earth-moving equipment. He urged everyone to turn back immediately before the summit sheared off, apparently confident that the mountain had scheduled its collapse for exactly the hour he arrived. When a construction worker shouted hello from the ridge, the man gasped dramatically and said, "It's worse than I thought. The mountain is calling out," revealing that the only thing shifting rapidly was his grip on reality. 43. A woman at the dentist's office caused total confusion after hearing the suction tool begin to gurgle and assuming it was malfunctioning and inhaling the room, demanding the dentist shut it off before it sucked up more than saliva, a vague but concerning category. The dentist attempted to reassure her that the suction sound meant the machine was functioning properly, but she countered that healthy machines don't make distressed noises, as though she expected the equipment to hum soothing lullabies while performing oral vacuum work. She clutched the armrests and threatened to press the emergency button, which does not exist but apparently should, specifically for people like her. When the dentist demonstrated the tool's harmless nature by suctioning a cup of water, she claimed the water sacrificed itself, proving the only thing she understood less than dentistry was physics, plumbing, and the concept of not panicking at routine medical noises. 44. A man waiting at a bus stop generated a localized panic event by declaring he smelled ozone, which he believed indicated imminent lightning strikes, electromagnetic disruption, or possibly alien abduction. He wasn't specific, but he was definitely excited. He warned commuters not to touch metal poles because the charge could jump at any moment, a prediction with no basis outside of his imagination and several poorly remembered documentaries. When someone politely suggested the smell was probably from a nearby photocopier business venting toner particles, he shook his head and said, "That's what they want you to think," a phrase that always guarantees nonsense will follow. When the bus arrived safely without delivering divine wrath, he announced that his heightened awareness had prevented an electrical event, creating the rare situation in which someone believes they personally stopped lightning with cautionary vibes alone. 45. A woman in a candle store decided she was moments from suffocation because she smelled too many scents at once, declaring the air chemically unstable and insisting the employees open the doors before the fragrance levels reached toxic blend, a condition that does not exist but sounded legit enough to terrify two nearby shoppers. When the staff explained that candles are made of wax and fragrance oils, not volatile industrial gases, she accused them of downplaying a serious olfactory hazard, which is possibly the most dramatic thing anyone has ever said surrounded by jars labeled lavender breeze. She staggered toward the exit, claiming dizziness, even though she hadn't taken more than 6 steps since entering. Once outside, breathing perfectly normal suburban air, she vowed to warn others, presumably about the dangers of smelling too many pleasant things in a building designed for exactly that purpose. 46. A man at a DIY home improvement workshop derailed the entire session after hearing a distant hammer strike and assuming the structure was beginning to collapse, which is ironic considering the class was quite literally about building things with hammers. He insisted the vibrations he felt were structural fatigue signals, a phrase he probably picked up from a disaster documentary and decided to deploy with confidence. When the instructor pointed out the sound came from another class assembling birdhouses, he remained unconvinced, arguing that wooden stress calls are subtle, as if trees communicate through Morse code when upset. He took cover behind a stack of paint cans, peering out with the vigilance of someone defending a medieval castle, and refused to rejoin the group until the birdhouse builders were asked to halt their destabilizing activity, sparking the first recorded diplomatic incident between two people holding beginner-level craft knives. 47. A woman at a water park initiated pure chaos after seeing a ripple on the surface of the lazy river and assuming a pump had reversed suction, convinced the water was about to drain vortex style, pulling every swimmer into a whirlpool worthy of an ancient myth. Lifeguards tried to explain that waves occur when, shockingly, people move in water. But she insisted this ripple was too organized, as though the water had developed a strategic consciousness. She demanded the evacuation of all guests, including children happily floating in novelty tubes shaped like donuts, who did not appreciate being dragged out of their peaceful drift. When the staff demonstrated that gently patting the water produces the same ripple effect, she accused them of training the vortex, suggesting she believed the water park had partnered with Poseidon for off-season mischief. 48. A man in a hotel hallway caused a scene after hearing a faint clicking and assuming a bomb timer had activated, prompting him to sprint down the corridor, warning guests to seek structural shelter, which is not advice commonly found in hotel emergency guides. Staff quickly traced the sound to a housekeeping cart with a loose wheel, but the man insisted it was a very clever disguise, because apparently housekeeping has entered its espionage era. Even after they rolled the cart to demonstrate the clicking perfectly matched the wheel's rotation, he remained convinced that the hotel owed him hazard pay for his vigilance, because nothing says bravery like panicking at a noise produced by an overworked cleaning cart whose only crime was needing WD-40. 49. A woman in a grocery store convinced herself the freezer section was malfunctioning because she saw a wisp of cold air drift out and believed it signaled an imminent coolant breach, something she imagined would freeze everyone solid, cartoon style. She warned other shoppers not to breathe the hyper-cold vapor, ignoring the fact that millions of people managed to survive freezer aisles daily without turning into popsicles. When an employee opened the door and explained it was normal condensation mixing with room temperature air, she frowned like a disappointed detective unveiling a clue that didn't match her theory. She then requested that the store deactivate the freezer zone until a specialist arrived, because nothing says efficiency like letting the ice cream melt to appease someone convinced cold air is planning an uprising. 50. A man at a corporate office triggered total confusion after hearing the building's HVAC system kick on and insisting it was the sound of pressurization failure, warning everyone to stay away from windows before the air equalizes, a sentence that makes no sense unless you're aboard a submarine or a sci-fi escape pod. When the facilities manager explained that the air system routinely cycles throughout the day, he accused her of following a script, like she was part of a secret cover-up to conceal imminent decompression. He marched around checking doors, vents, and even ceiling tiles for pressure leakage, an activity that accomplished absolutely nothing except alarming 3 interns who hadn't yet learned that workplaces sometimes include people who live in perpetual disaster movie mode. 51. A woman at a small-town fair delivered the ultimate panic performance when she saw the Ferris wheel stop temporarily, something Ferris wheels do every few minutes to load passengers, and concluded the structure was in freefall, a theory that ignored both physics and the glaring fact that the wheel was very much not falling. She shrieked that gravity had finally won, which is certainly dramatic for a ride designed to move slower than most toddlers. When staff calmly explained that stopping between rotations is completely normal, she insisted the wheel had accepted its fate, as though carnival rides suffer existential crises. Dozens of onlookers watched as she demanded the fairgrounds shut down the gravitational field, which is a bold request for people whose job primarily involves handing out corn dogs. And in that moment, she unintentionally delivered the perfect finale to humanity's long resume of pointless panic. Because nothing sums up our species quite like someone fearing a stationary wheel while holding a funnel cake bigger than her own panic-addled brain. If that parade of panic didn't break your faith in humanity, congrats, you're tougher than most. Drop your dumbest disaster in your head moment below and maybe subscribe before reality panics next.